Hello and welcome to Conversations with Mark Becker, a podcast produced by Georgia State University. And you can find this episode and all of our episodes wherever you listen to podcasts. In this and future podcasts, I sit down with leaders who are shaping the future of higher education in America and beyond. We dive into the challenges and opportunities facing higher education and explore policies and practices that show promise of a brighter future. Hope that you will find these conversations stimulating and thought-provoking. And if you do, please subscribe so that you will not miss future episodes. Again, I'm your host, Georgia State President Mark Becker, and today my guest is Cole Clark. Cole is the managing director of the Higher Education Group at Deloitte. Cole, welcome.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate you having me on today.
It's great to have you on. We've known each other for a number of years, and you've worked in a few different roles since we first met. But now you're at Deloitte, and Deloitte, many people know, is a big consulting company, has a large practice area. But the higher education practice, how does Deloitte touch higher education? What are the practice areas that you cover?
Well, the interesting bit of history around this is that Deloitte's actually done work in higher ed for over 90 years. In fact,
did you start it?
I've only been around for about 4 of those 90, having been with a few other places in my career. But our first job was as the auditor of Princeton University. That's where we started. But it has been a relatively recent area of focus for the firm in terms of dedicating a sector to in higher ed to at the firm. It's been about 5 years ago now that we formalized that higher ed sector within the firm. Even though, again, we've done work across many different
auditing,
domains.
Accounting type work for 90 years.
And I think that has been the for those that don't know us all that well, that's sort of the MO, because our roots as a firm are as an audit and tax firm, and so that's what most people assume we do. And in fact, we are the external auditor for a handful of institutions around the country, but that's really not the focus of the practice. What we strive to be is a broad end-to-end consultancy across pretty much every aspect of the academic enterprise, with the exception of those things that touch pedagogy and teaching and learning.
Right.
So everything about making the academy more effective, more efficient, being more, doing a better job at attracting, retaining, and completing students, making the administrative side of the house a lot more efficient and effective, and using technology as an enabler across sort of all those domains. Not looking at technology as an end in and of itself, which I think is too often the case in higher ed. The shiny object is not the end, but really using those tools in an effective way. And that generally means being good at helping institutions change and think about culture and the changes needed in the culture in order for those modern technological tools to be of any value.
And that's, of course, when I first met you, you were with Oracle, so there's that technology connection. You don't come out of the audit and accounting background.
No, I don't even pretend to be an auditor on TV. And no, if you looked at my, if anyone were to look at my resume, they would assume that I'm a technologist. I started my career in the 80s with Apple Computer. There was, a big emphasis on education. Steve Jobs was very focused on education, and that was attractive to me. My father is a college professor most of my young life. He became a chief information officer in higher ed later on, but I think that influence has weighed heavily on me as well. But from Apple, I went to Sun, from Sun to Oracle. So looking at those, that part of my career, you'd think that I come with that sort of headset of, well, technology solves all problems. Right. But I really have been, particularly in higher education and education generally, fixated on this notion that you have to be willing to change as an organization, your processes, your workflows, your policies, your culture, in order for any sort of modern technology to have any great effect. And that really underpins everything we do at Deloitte. It is all about change and using these tools as change levers, as change enablers.
So universities come to Deloitte, looking for help. What are some of the if you will, practice areas where you're getting requests? Are universities coming in specifically looking for help with technology or with change or within functional areas, say HR, research administration, financial aid administration? What are the themes you're getting out of the clients that are coming to Deloitte?
Well, I think you would agree with me that higher education institutions move in packs. They adopt things in groups, and this
we have fads and trends just like any other sector.
And so this notion of on the technological side, moving to the cloud seems to have everyone enamored and fixated with I've got to be in the cloud. I've got to be moving.
Do they know what that means when they ask it?
And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around what that really means. What I think its ultimate impact is, it's forcing a conversation about adopting best practice, leading practice, and standardization in areas that really aren't all that differentiating to higher education. How we pay people in higher ed, how we manage our charts of accounts, how we manage our benefit systems. I mean, they're important things that you can't get wrong. And if you get those things wrong, you end up with some very dissatisfied constituents. But it's not necessary for us all to do that, 95 different ways. So I think the notion of cloud, which is all about running systems, a single code line that's written for everybody, not, something that's customized institution by institution, has finally has been a lever to get institutions to think about how can we do things in a more standard way that aren't that differentiating.
Right. Certainly here in the state of Georgia and the University System of Georgia, certain operations have been, if you will, centralized back office at a remote site, many in the benefits and HR area. Are you seeing a similar trend in other states and other systems around the country?
Oh, most definitely. I think there's been, unfortunately, less traction in doing things at a system level than I would like to have seen. I think the Georgia system has been a bit of an exemplar there. But the experience here is an indication of just how hard it is to get these things done, because it's very difficult to get a collection of institutions that are very different geographically, demographically, to come together on a common way of doing things. The natural reaction is that I'm going to lose something in that process.
We're unique.
Right.
Georgia State, we are definitely unique.
I'm going to lose something, and I'm going to be a loser in this process. And I think that's going back to the point I made earlier about the criticality of organizational change management and getting that part right. Effective communication, effective governance, leadership, being a constant communicator of what the future state's going to look like and why that's going to be better for me as a faculty member or as an administrator or as a student.
Well, I know at Deloitte you draw on a lot of assets, meaning people from different areas. It's not as if there's this one group of people that do education and they don't look at anything else, and
that's right.
People over there. So in your experience working with these groups that are working with higher education institutions, have there been examples where they've said in higher ed they seem to get it better than we typically see, or they don't get it as well as what we typically see? Or is higher education not that much differentiated from any of the other clients that Deloitte has?
I think there has been a noticeable slowness to adopt leading practice in some areas that other industries are far ahead on. But there's an economic impetus behind some of that it doesn't. It's a different mission in higher education, and so
we certainly don't work from a P&L,
right,
like many businesses.
But I also think that you can find areas where there's been achievement in higher education that outstrips some other areas, and I think that some other sectors. And the one that comes to mind immediately for me is the synergies that exist between the disparate functional areas within the academy. Getting HR, getting finance, facilities, auxiliaries, IT to come together and work together towards a common goal. It's higher ed's got its fiefdoms and its silos, just like any other sector. but you'd be surprised at just how calcified those have become in many commercial enterprises too.
I sort of wonder, just whether it's the fact that higher ed is mission-based as opposed to profit-based.
Yes.
And if you can present the business case, if you will, for the change that's being made as being central to the mission in some way, shape, or form, it may be easier to get buy-in and participation, collaboration, than where you've got separate business lines that are almost, in a sense, competing for who's going to be the highest performers.
I think that's true, especially if you are blessed, as you have been here at Georgia State, with some consistency and constancy in leadership. I think one of the things that is bedeviling higher ed right now is the rapid turnover in leadership roles and the constant the persistent notion, I should say, that we have to go outside of our own institution to find the next leader. We don't do enough leadership development within our own organizations to get those individuals ready for the next level, that somehow bringing somebody in from the outside is going to solve the problem that the predecessor wasn't able to fix. And then when you have that change, a lot of the momentum that you may have had in certain areas, I think, is set back or even lost. But I want to go back to a point you made earlier about the sort of bringing in leading practice from other parts of our world into higher ed. I think that's something that's often overlooked. It's easy for higher education institutions to look at the fact that most other sectors are profit-based, not mission-based, and then immediately saying, well, that way of doing things is not for us for that reason.
Well, that's the wrong leap. Yes.
Yeah. But that is very common. And I think what you asked earlier about what are some of the tenets or guiding principles behind our practice at Deloitte, it's that we can bring some of the expertise that we have derived from many, many other sectors and bring that to higher education, but it has to be done with an awareness and a sensitivity to higher ed culture. There was a famous saying, I think it was one of IBM's former CEOs, it may have been Lou Gerstner or Sam Palmisano, one of the two, said, I had to embrace the culture to change the culture. And I think that's something that we think about at Deloitte all the time, is that we can't just bring a public-private partnership leading practice from government into higher ed and expect it to just work without some nuance, without some thoughtfulness to how it is applied in a higher education context.
Well, one of the areas of technology that is written about extensively in the business literature, but higher ed's not immune, is artificial intelligence. And, there's lots of companies trying to be out in front and out developing AI tools and deploying them to their competitive advantage. Are you seeing, or what are you seeing in higher ed with regards to the emergence of AI? Because I know certainly here at Georgia State, we've embraced AI in a number of areas and have been an early adopter in some cases, or an early deployer, really, of AI, and particularly chatbots in our environment. Where you look up the street at Georgia Tech, where they've used AI for teaching assistants.
Yes.
The famous Joe Watson,
who was solicited for a date, I believe, by an unknowing.
It's in the TED Talk. Yeah, just go to YouTube and look at or go to anywhere you can get TED Talks and look at the TED Talk on Joe Watson at Georgia Tech. But as you look at the higher ed practice at Deloitte, and you drawing from other areas of business, as well as what clients are asking for, do you see some particular themes in AI for higher ed at this point?
Well, first of all, I think AI is dangerously getting close to the same problem that the cloud moniker has, which is everything is being slapped with an AI label.
I need it. I don't know what it is, but I need it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's that hype cycle. I think we're still climbing the left side of that curve. But in practice, where higher ed seems to be doing the most with AI is in a pretty pedestrian arena, but still one that has significant potential for gains, and that is in automating processes that human beings have been doing manually for many years. That first of all, it's not very efficient from a productivity perspective, but it oftentimes introduces a lot of error, and in some areas those errors can be very costly. Financial aid is a good example of that, where I think there's a lot of headroom for the introduction of artificial intelligence to automate some of those processes. You mentioned some of the more advanced use cases, like inserting robots in the places of teaching assistants, chatbots for students to answer routine questions. I applaud you for what you're doing here. I don't think it's as common as it should be. But as with many things in higher education, once the momentum gets started, you tend to see a bit of a herd movement. And I think, as I said, with the process automation, that is becoming quite common. We're automating HR processes using bots. We're automating some student system processes, some financial aid processes with bots, and I think there's a lot of other areas where that could be applied.
Well, that's certainly the line that I use frequently is anything that can be routinized will be automated.
Yes.
And in particular, if it's going to use bots or artificial intelligence, it's going to require a massive amount of data. The bots have to be trained, they have to learn, they have to be adaptive, and you need massive amounts of data. So any routine process that produces and manages a lot of information will be, I think, ripe for the deployment of artificial intelligence technologies and bots in the future.
No doubt about it. And I think there's some more advanced use cases that get into some areas that the vendor community in this space haven't quite perfected. But I think that we're not too far away from a day when AI will be used to help guide a student through a registration process, and not just in a, this class is full, you're on a waiting list, but actually thoughtfully guiding them using technology that will help them make better decisions about what pathway they should be taking from a course of study. I think there'll be automation around helping them make better financial aid decisions. That's an area where, as an industry, I think we've got a lot of work to do. So I think it's not just going to be about automating some of these rather pedestrian, mundane back office processes. We can really use this in a way to help students, and that's really what it all comes down to.
I think it's the area of coaching, and there have been predictions already that bots, AI will replace executive coaches. I mean, there's a lot of executives, a lot of mid-level managers aspiring to climb the leadership ladder, who hire coaches. And the belief is, because the questions and the topics tend to be the same time and time again, that AI tools will be developed there. And so it's whether it's what courses to take, which financial aid decisions to make, or for employees making decisions about a variety of areas where the same questions get asked time and time again, is just an area that's ripe. So your answer doesn't surprise me. It's just it's all a question of time, because I'm old enough to remember when I graduated college 39 years ago that I was told that not to become a computer programmer because that artificial intelligence would put me out of a job early in my career. We're not quite there after 39 years, but the prediction's still being made.
Well, I'm starting to show my age a bit, because I if I were to rewind the tapes on myself 20 years ago, I would probably be shocked to hear my 53-year-old self saying this today. But I think we've also got to be very, very careful about ethics and bias issues creeping into AI. That's something that we need to spend more time on.
There's certainly a lot of discussion, a lot of meetings, a lot of conferences, and I expect this is an area where some of our colleagues in the humanities are going to be front and center in these conversations.
Without a doubt.
Terrific. Well, Cole, it's been terrific having you on. Really appreciate it, and look forward to following the work that you're doing. And I know that from time to time we get to work together on some things, so it's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Mark.
And this has been Conversations with Mark Becker, a podcast produced by Georgia State University, and you've been listening to a conversation with Cole Clark. To hear future conversations with leaders who are helping shape the future of higher education, you will find Conversations with Mark Becker anywhere where you get your podcast. Thank you again for listening, and please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss a single future podcast.